welcome. Thanks for joining. And Grace, we're really happy to have you with us today for our actual third Alumni Ask Me Anything to talk about your career coming from a student in SFS to now a paralegal. I thought we could just get started by if you could tell us a little bit about, what you studied at Georgetown and kind of where your career journey led you and how you ended up where you are right now.
Sure. Well, first, thanks, Beth, and thanks to Cawley for the invitation to talk at the Alumni Ask Me Anything series. I'm very excited to be back on the hilltop, even if it is virtually, and hopefully I can get back in person soon. But I just graduated from Georgetown last year, which is kind of crazy. It's already been almost a year. But I was a student in the School of Foreign Service. I studied international history. I minored in Russian language, and I got a certificate in diplomatic studies from the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy. Also at Georgetown, I was a member of the crew team and an active member in campus ministry, particularly music ministry in Dahlgren Chapel. So I kind of did a little bit of everything, or different areas at Georgetown. So that was really fun. In terms of how I kind of became a paralegal, it was a bit of a, I guess, last minute career change in my career trajectory throughout Georgetown. And I think similarly to a lot of other SFS students in particular, there is like this idea of going to Georgetown, studying foreign service, and then becoming a diplomat or working in international affairs. And I was definitely in that realm for, as Beth can attest, for a long time. But then I kind of took a step back senior year, or mostly senior spring. And I wasn't really quite sure if I was ready to make the commitment or life change commitment that a lot of careers in public service and international affairs required. I kind of wanted a little bit of time, coming off of COVID university, being virtual for a year and a half of my Georgetown career, and to kind of take that time to really think about what I wanted to do next. And so I had this one interesting project or paper that I wrote that was kind of the first instance in which I could see how I could apply my interest and passion for foreign language and international affairs and, US foreign policy, how all of that could play into a legal career or legal education. And it was a very small window, but it was one that I thought, maybe I should look into this a little more. And so I started applying to paralegal positions, I would say around February, March of my senior year. And just so happened that the one that stuck that I interviewed for, I got, and here I am now. So I'm happy to talk about anything regarding being a paralegal, about my Georgetown experience, about the application process, the transition from academic to professional environment or workforce environment. So hopefully we can get into the question and answering. And then if you all have any other questions, I'm happy to answer those as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Grace. So full disclosure, I worked with Grace for about 4 years from freshman year on. So I'm familiar with her career journey. But one thing I was hoping you could talk to is, we are at the point, it's after spring break. A lot of students, undergrad, grad, are looking at graduation and going, oh crap, I need a job, or I need to do something. I got to figure out, the rest of my life. Can you kind of remember back to a year ago where you were at and kind of what steps did you take to start looking at all these different options you were thinking about?
Sure. So I remember being in those shoes very clearly, and can attest it is not the best feeling. It's a little stressful. You have a lot going on towards the end of the year. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm graduating in 2 months. I need a job. So I hear you and I feel you've been there. For me, how I kind of managed that stress and anxiety, I just started making lists. I'm a big list person. So I would make a list in my planner, or set deadlines for myself of saying, okay, I found a bunch of jobs that I want to apply to. I'm going to do or aim to maybe apply to 2 every Friday, because I think Fridays I didn't have class. So that was kind of like my dedicated application day. So I would always set aside time and think of job applications, emailing either alumni or trying to go to different career events at the Career Center. I would try to schedule those into my calendar, almost like a second class. In terms of researching jobs, I think sometimes you can fall into that category of, I just need to apply to everything that I see. And I just need a job, which I also was in that position too. I did apply to a lot of jobs, some of which I was just anxious, so I just applied, which is one way to go about that. I think I did get to a point though where I was like, okay, this is going to be my reality for a few years, or for me, it was a few years, even if it is a year. Maybe I should kind of try to spend my time and really focus on, instead of 10 applications, maybe let's do 7, because the 3 that I would cut out maybe wouldn't be the best fit, or I'm not as excited about, and really put that extra time into the applications that you are excited about. I'll kind of link that back to the paralegal position, because this is about SFS to paralegal, or my experience in that. And when I decided to make that shift to looking at law firms for after college, I kind of was unfamiliar with the legal realm in general. So I had to do a little bit of research on that, and like what types of law might be interesting to me. But I also tried to find one of my interests and passions, which in this case, it was language. I love studying language. I wanted to continue that study or the use of my foreign languages. So I looked for law firms that had big international law or international global presence. And that's kind of how I came across where I work today. So I'd say kind of try to find one thing or hone in on one thing that you're really passionate about and see how it can apply in different areas. Even if it's an area that you might not be most familiar with, as I was with looking for jobs in the legal world.
Awesome. So anybody on the line, anybody have any questions for Grace?
Yeah, many. Thank you.
Yeah.
If I may.
Please.
The first question is, you mentioned initially that your interest has always been in foreign policy. So from a paralegal position, how much are you still focusing on foreign policy, and how are you approaching foreign policy from as a paralegal?
So I think the main application of my interest in foreign policy, or just like foreign affairs or international affairs, I would say would be the better application of that. And the main application, or the main way in which that's manifested as a paralegal is working at a firm. I'm a paralegal, a litigation paralegal at Cleary Gottlieb, Steen & Hamilton, and Cleary Gottlieb has a very large global presence. And so there are a lot of international clients and movement and interaction between various offices. So that's kind of how I've been able to have that international exposure. But it definitely is a little bit different than, working at a think tank or doing more of that thematic research that I don't necessarily have, but I still have some sort of exposure to that.
Do you do any analysis in Russian, for example? You mentioned that you study Russian. Are you using Russian right now?
Not necessarily, no. It kind of depends on the workflows. I haven't been able to use certain languages as much as others, but there are opportunities. And even in just my own opportunities, I've tried to fulfill some downtime with, going on Duolingo and maintaining my languages that way. And there are different ways. And not being a student, you do have more opportunities to fill that time with other things that you like to do besides just studying. So yeah.
And are you planning on pursuing a legal career, or are you still at that exploring stage?
So that is the question of the year, I guess, now that we're entering my second year as a paralegal. I think the answer is yes. And even if I don't practice law, which I'm not so sure about that yet, I am more confident now than I was starting this job that I do want to go to law school. Whether that's going to law school and doing a master's, or at the same time, or going to law school and then doing a master's afterwards. I think what's really good about, or what I've appreciated about being a paralegal, is I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to law school. It was kind of not only a last minute decision, but I didn't really have much exposure to what it was like to be a lawyer, even like what law school is like. So working as a paralegal, you kind of get exposure to the daily life of an attorney, how a law firm works, how the law works, you know, like what is legal writing, which is somewhat different than, you know, the writing that I did as an IHIS major. And so I learned very quickly whether or not law school was going to be an option for me, or if it was one that I wanted to pursue. So if you're kind of in that boat or you're unsure, I would definitely recommend it, just because I've had a good experience trying to figure out that part of my journey.
And I'm sorry, I have one more question. Did you pursue any sort of like certificate to become a paralegal, or did you just apply with the credentials you had at the time?
So that's a good question, because I know a lot of paralegal positions do require a paralegal certificate. I did not. It kind of depends on the job or the job posting. Some firms require it, some firms don't. So to that question, I would just say, if you're interested in a position, just look at the requirements and see if they require it. I'm not quite sure how you would go about that, just because I didn't, but I think there are firms that you do not need a paralegal certificate, to my knowledge.
Thank you so much.
Grace, I was curious, you know, I get this question a lot, like, what exactly does a paralegal do? And I understand that like different law firms have different areas of law in which they focus, but could you like walk through a day in your life, if there is such a thing, and talk more about like what your job actually entails?
Sure. That is a good question. I get that question a lot too. I would caveat this by saying a typical day, like a typical day in the life of a paralegal, or at least for me, can change immediately. Like as a litigation paralegal in the world of litigation, you can go into your day thinking, oh, you know, this isn't going to be that crazy of a day. And then by like 4 o'clock, you're like, oh my gosh, I haven't really had any water today. Have I stood up like to walk, because just I keep getting email after email. And so that kind of is a little bit exciting about it. And you do learn a lot and you are exposed to a lot, which, or at least I have been, so that's been really fun. But if I could sum it up into like the most general role, I would say there are kind of two pillars of my job, or at least in what I do as a paralegal. The first is an administrative pillar. And so in that, there's a lot of organizing meetings and coordinating things among different paralegals with the associates, a lot of email and case management on that side. And so you're tasked with knowing where X document is. So when the associate or attorney emails you and says, hey, do you have that document? You're like, yes, I know where that is. And you can send it to them. It's also, the other big pillar is, I would say, more like the academic pillar, which is a little bit more related to the legal side, I would say, versus the administrative side. And in that, I call it academic pillar because I'd say a lot of those skills are what I did when I was a student, or similar to what I did as a student. And the biggest role is blue booking. And so if you don't know what blue booking is, if you become a paralegal, you will very soon know what blue booking is. But basically, the blue book, I kind of think of it as the Chicago Manual of Style, but for the legal world. So every time a brief or a different legal document is going to be filed, the paralegals are like the last step in the chain of the team to proof it in terms of like spelling and making sure that everything is spaced correctly, making sure that, you know, the letterhead is up to date and like everything is there that needs to be there. And then the blue booking part is anytime the attorneys cite or reference a case or any other legal authority or authority in general, you want to make sure it's cited correctly, and that's how you cite via the blue book. So it's actually a book, and it's also online, but you can look at the book and say, okay, I have a case. That's just the most basic example. And the way that you cite a case is very specific. You have your plaintiffs versus defendants. You have the reporter, pin cite, you know, all of that formatting. The paralegals make sure that that's all correct. And really the goal of that is so that whoever's reading the document can find the case and knows exactly to which case you are referring or citing. So that takes up a lot of time and a lot of my work. But it's interesting because you get to read a lot of different things. You get to read or get exposure to different types of cases and different types of law and arguments. So I kind of enjoy blue booking. I kind of like the meticulous aspect of it. And I feel like it's allowed me to learn a lot in a short amount of time. So I would say those are the two biggest aspects.
Wonderful. And then one of our other participants asked, can you touch on a little bit too in terms of like the lifestyle of working in a firm and hours, overtime? I think especially in a big city like New York, we have an impression of what your life might look like. So if you could speak a little bit to like those other aspects of work.
Sure, that's a great question. And one, if in particular, if you are interested in working at a bigger firm, I would recommend having a good idea of the lifestyle and time commitment that you are stepping into, because you do work a lot of overtime in some of these bigger firms. And I've worked a lot of overtime, again, kind of like with that planning aspect in my typical day. You also kind of have to be a little bit flexible. And okay, if you have plans, like, yes, you want to stick to your plans and make sure you do have a good work-life balance, but then sometimes you just kind of have to be flexible and know if something big comes up, you might have to, you know, take a step back and make sure the work gets done with your team. And so that I would say is a big aspect of the job that was a little bit tricky for me to get acclimated to. Not so much the sheer amount of hours I was working. I found that I was able to adapt to that pretty quickly, just because as a Georgetown student, I was used to working a lot of late hours, working on a lot of tense projects. And so those skills kind of merged pretty easily. As a paralegal, the one that was and still is difficult for me is that work-life balance. And you kind of are, I think someone explained it to me once, like you're the gatekeeper of your own time. And so if you need an hour for dinner, like, and you need that time to step away from the computer, like you should make that time for yourself, because you have to kind of manage all these tasks that are coming into you and say, okay, does that need to get done now? And some of it does, like you have to just switch, get the assignment done and send it back to the attorney. But sometimes I had to learn that it's okay to be like, hey, no, I was gonna go grab dinner. Is it okay if I get to this in an hour? And sometimes that is okay, and kind of making that time for yourself and is one that I'm still learning how to do that well. But But yeah, so I'd say I have my typical work day. And usually you will know which days, just based on your calendar, which days you would have to work late. Sometimes you might have to work early, but mostly it's late in my experience. So you'll have those days, and so you can kind of plan around that. Other times it's kind of good to just be proactive and reach out to your teams and say, hey, are there any upcoming deadlines? Just so that you can get them on your calendar and try to plan well that bit. I'm a planner, and so it's been kind of hard to not be able to plan everything all of the time. But there are ways around that, if that answers your question, and I can elaborate on anything.
Yeah, I think we got another question. Like, what time do you usually end your work day? Like, what are your typical hours? And then I'm also curious to know, do you have billable hours, or is it just
Mhm.
like you work until the job is done?
Yes. So I do, my typical day is like 9:30 to 5:30. So it starts a little bit later, but also ends a little bit later.
That's a
Um,
pretty New York thing from what I've gathered.
yeah, which is difficult as a rower. I was used to being up so early. Um, so having to, like, I still get up early and like work out, do my laundry in the morning, then go to work. Like it's a weird transition, but sometimes it's nice. Like you can sleep in a little bit later than you usually do and still get to work on time. But yeah, so that's the first answer. Billable hours. It's a typical law firm lifestyle. You are on the billable hour, which kind of just means that your time, you like break up your time into the different matters or tasks that you're working on, and then those are allocated to the various clients. So for me, it was a lot of math, having to get used to doing math again, because I didn't have to do that as much in the school phone service. And then the last question. Okay, and then my like average hours, I'd say I work an average of 7 hours a day, for 5 days a week. So that's about 35 hours base. And then it really, like, I can't really give an average because it really just fluctuates with your different caseloads. So I've worked a lot more than that. I've worked a little bit more than that. And it just kind of depends both on I would say the cycle of your case, where your case is and the litigation process, as well as different times of the year I've noticed are busier than others. So for example, like the summer was pretty chill. And it was kind of nice starting in the summer because I slowly got used to my typical day. I had a little bit of extra time that I could read up on my cases and get to like learn a little bit more about the matters I was on. And then kind of review my own notes from when I was getting onboarded. So you kind of have a little bit more time to familiarize yourself. And then the fall was really busy. So, that was a little bit of an up. The holidays, it kind of slowed down again. So it is it vacillates a lot, depending on, I'd say, time of year as well as your own caseload.
All right, so we're getting a lot by chat, and also for our participants, please feel free to unmute yourself. There's a small amount of us, so like we can just have a conversation too. It doesn't have to be like, okay, now you go. But we're getting, I think, a good question is, I don't know if it's Eugene or Eugenia, or something, but she
Sorry,
asked.
yeah, it's Eugenie, and I'm sorry I can't be on video right now, but
Oh,
thank
no
you so
worries.
much, Grace, for being here. Yeah.
No worries.
Okay.
But yeah, you had a great question about finding the paralegal position and like what that interview process was like. And I'll kind of add to that a little bit. Like, how did you translate, like, being a rower or working on campus ministry to the skills needed to be a paralegal? Like, knowing that, like, yeah, you didn't know what the blue book was before you started.
Yeah, I didn't know what the blue book was before I started. But that's a great question. And I think the one thing that helped me the most in finding paralegal positions was I honestly would just I would Google law firms and say, okay, I'm interested in international law. Okay, let's Google top international law firms in the United States. And then I would go to each one of their websites and see if there was a paralegal position. So kind of general, but it seems to be productive. And then I mentioned this earlier, I'm not sure if you're on the call yet, but if you have an interest, like I was interested in languages, or if you're interested in, I don't know, international trade, and like international finance, there are law firms that specialize in that. So you can research that type of law, and like there are even international trade paralegals at some firms. So you can always look into that too. So that's how I went about it. I Googled global law firms, big international law firms, came across Cleary, went to Cleary's website, saw the paralegal position and applied that through that. And then in terms of the interview process, it was pretty similar to many other interviews that I had before. And I would say one skill or aspect that I think has been most applicable, especially being a rower, but you don't have to be a student athlete to have this skill, but just being able to manage a lot of various tasks all at the same time and being able to switch back and forth between things, I found really helpful. Because like I said, you can be working on like one project or one case all day, but you can also have those days where like you'll be working on something, you get an email saying, I need this now. You have to pause, switch to the other thing, get that done. And you have to be good about switching back and forth between different projects and making sure you don't lose your spot or lose your place in that switching back and forth. So that was kind of one of the main skills that I think has been very useful. The other is time management too, and kind of in that, you know, if an attorney sends you an assignment, says, okay, I need this by 2 p.m. Like, okay, how am I going to get that done by 2 p.m.? Like, look at the assignment, see if it's realistic. And if it is, okay, great. Like, how you're going to have to manage your time to get it done by that timeline. Also, I've learned kind of in that, as I was speaking a little bit earlier, I've kind of learned to be like, okay, if you get an assignment and it asks you for X amount of time, like it's kind of okay to look at the assignment and assess, is that going to be done in time? Or do I have enough time? Is this realistic? And then ask for a little bit more time, or ask for help. I sometimes am a little bit more of an individual worker, and which is fine if you're like that too, but it's also good to know when to ask your coworkers and other paralegals for help on assignments to make sure the work gets done and gets done well.
How do you manage when you have, say, multiple partners or lawyers asking for stuff at the same time and like having to, what they call in business, manage upward, but basically talk to different bosses who have competing demands?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And what's helpful is, at least in my experience, some teams, like there'll be other paralegals on them depending on how big the case is. And so it's kind of you get an assignment, you talk to each other, see who's free. If no one's free, then you kind of have to go back and say, okay, we're all, working on other matters right now. What is the necessity? Like when does this need to be done? Do we have a little bit of free time? I might be able to get to it in say an hour or 2 hours or this afternoon. And so it's a lot of delegating tasks to other paralegals, but say you're the only person on the case and you're working on another case and then you get that assignment, but you don't have another paralegal to delegate to, you do kind of have to talk to that attorney or like maybe reassess the assignment that you're currently working on and see if you can kind of delegate between the two. Or, if it has to get done, it has to get done. So you might bring in someone else or just try to work on the two projects as best you can.
Are there any experiences that you had, you mentioned rowing, but are there other experiences that you had, whether class or extracurricular, that you think that surprised you how much you're like, oh, hey, I'm using this now, and I never thought that, that experience would lead to what you're doing right now?
Um, hmm. I don't really know. um, yeah, I would say less so like a curricular that or an extracurricular experience I've had surprised me in the job. I think what surprised me more was how good this job and being like I one thing that I say about being a paralegal is even if you don't want to go to law school after, even if you don't want to practice law, in my experience, it has just been an amazing first job because I think it really allows you to bridge the gap between being a student and being in an academic world and then being in a professional world, which like for me going into this job was like, I know time management, I know how to write, I know how to do email, like I can be professional. I've had internships, jobs, XYZ. And then you kind of get there. And I started virtually. So I mean, I started working, I'm like, okay, this is different. Like I was used to Zoom school for an hour and a half, or like for a year and a half, sorry, for hours a day on Zoom, like fine, working from home, gonna be fine. But I actually really struggled with like the screen time and having to focus from 9 to 5. And it's just a different way of thinking and a different way of functioning, even though you're using the same skills, if that makes sense. So that's kind of one thing that I was surprised at the most, I guess, just in general. And then what I kind of realized after being in this role, what I found most surprising or good is that like this is a good first job. If you're unsure of what you want to do, if you don't really want to go to school right away after undergrad and you kind of just need a second to not be a student, especially at the caliber that we are at Georgetown, then it does allow you to kind of take that step back, still maintain those skills, still grow as a professional, but also give you time to reflect and really think about, okay, what's my next step going to be? So that's been a really positive experience for me.
And what are things like in terms of whether it's your firm or other firms that you're seeing in terms of where we are with the COVID pandemic and hybrid work and like what's your firm like? What do you think the trends are going to be like moving forward?
So in my experience, I started virtually. I was fully virtual until I would say the fall, and then I started going back into the office a little bit. And then we just recently started going back full time, and we have kind of a flexible schedule where you can be in 3 days a week and then home for 2 days, and you can kind of fix like what works best for you in picking those days. I really like going into the office. I think it's been really good for me to, you know, get used to going in person to an institution again. Like and I just have really liked meeting people and feeling like I have a career and I go to work every day. And so I've been going in about 4 days a week into the office and one from home like today. But it is nice having that flexibility, I think. And it is interesting. I think it's even, I don't know how it has been in Georgetown the last year or so, but I think the trends are really going towards this virtual environment and being able to use these platforms for events kind of like this, where you can have discussions and have meetings or events that without having to actually be there in person. And I think there are pros to that in my opinion. But I think for the most part, out of my friends, both who don't work in the legal field, I don't know about other law firms, but the trends, at least that I've been noticing in New York, where I am now, a lot of people are going back, and you do see more people commuting to work. So I think we are moving back to some in person. So.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Grace? No?
Thank you so much. Very, very helpful.
Yeah, Grace, I
Sure.
guess we'll close with, do you have any, tidbits of advice that you'd have that you wish someone had told you a year ago, as you were looking at the job search, or any words of wisdom, having been there not too long ago?
Yeah. I guess the first I would say is take a deep breath. You will find a job and you will get there. And also try to enjoy your last couple of months at Georgetown. It is one thing that I very much miss being at Georgetown. I miss being a student. I don't necessarily miss the homework, but I do miss the hilltop, and being in that community every day. And then the other thing that I will just say is that, kind of like I was saying, that bridge or that transition from academic to workplace environment, no matter where you are, or what field you end up in, be prepared that it's gonna feel weird for a little bit of time. And honestly, it took me about like maybe 6 months, 4 to 6 months, to feel like I was in a groove. I had a routine, and I felt like sure on my feet, that I was new. Like I felt like I had made that transition from academic. And so if you start a job and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if this was the right decision, like, I don't know if this is the right fit for me, give it a little bit of time, maybe 6 months like me, and you'll be able to kind of make really, really understand if you're in the right position, or maybe, that's an opportunity for you to research other opportunities. But all the while, you'll be developing more professional skills.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. We'll go ahead and conclude the conversation and I'll stop recording, but we appreciate it. And thank you, Grace, for your time and for coming back virtually. So hopefully at some point we could do something like this in person when you're visiting DC. So
Yes.